which we'll be looking at with various guests, basically Emma Burnell, Joshua Bergen, Warren Morgan, and when my wife's back home, Rachel Bergen, who'll be co-hosting, which and we'll be looking at with various feedback. And basically, we'll be looking at the day's events of the Biden inauguration, and we will also, and this is Rachel now, be discussing that and discussing the departure of Donald Trump. Okay, I'm setting up now. Okay. So yes, so that is the discussion we will be having at the moment. So we'll be discussing at 7:30, and do bear with me because at the moment I'm just checking all the technical stuff and hoping everything is all well. I'm not expecting any guests for another 7 minutes or so, but obviously I'm hoping everything can be set up. So I've just gone straight onto Zoom and then it goes straight onto YouTube. But no, I've discovered to my detriment that it records the feed almost immediately. So I have to be prepared for you guys from the word go. But basically, as I said, it's a discussion on the inauguration of President Biden, what's been going on that day, and what to expect from the future. What sort of presidency will we see with Joe Biden? What's going to happen to Donald Trump? Because there are some people who are quite keen to chase him with regards to various legal challenges. Some of the banks, I believe, are after him as well. And he's in for a lot of trouble. Interestingly, he never tried out whether to pardon himself, and he did not pardon any of his family. But he did pardon over 140 people, I believe, including Steve Bannon. Although no one who was involved in, as far as I'm aware, in the terrorist attack on Capitol Hill 2 weeks ago today. And by the way, all praise to the police and the security who've managed to keep it all together. So of that we are all profoundly grateful. And I have a comment. No, I don't have a comment. But it's just a reminder. And so I'm now waiting. I am 5 minutes early as of now for guests to arrive. So, but my wife has arrived. Hello, Rachel.
Good evening.
Yeah, so as I've just said, we'll be discussing the Biden's inauguration, what's happened today, what's happening in the future with regards to what to expect from a Biden administration, and also what to expect from what we think could happen to Donald Trump. Answers not on a postcard. This is the 21st century, and it will be quite late, but
certainly very historic today. I felt
very, very historic. But if you want to join in the discussion, as of now or later, we are live stream on YouTube, so look at my name, Paul Bergin, Burgin on YouTube, and add some comments there. Or code if you're watching this via my blog, Mars Hill, at www.paulbergin.blogspot.co.uk. Leave a comment also there. Every so often I will be checking to see what people have said, if anyone said anything, and I will try and get that into the conversation. So it's going to be a bit more of a freeform conversation today, because up until the last minute, everything was just so unexpected. Or in fact, no, unexpected is the wrong word. unpredictable.
Like we were expecting the unexpected.
Sort of. I think we're all still a bit shell shocked after the events of 2 weeks ago. So that is how things are. But yes, otherwise all well.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Still going on, isn't it?
The events are still going on. They're going to, at the moment, President Biden will be going to Arlington Cemetery, definitely with Presidents Clinton and Obama, possibly with President Bush as well.
Okay.
So there'll be a ceremony there. But it's going to be a fascinating day. And also, let's not forget Kamala Harris, who is the first female vice president and the first vice president of color.
First African American and first Asian American and first woman.
Yes.
So lots of firsts there.
Yes. And also with Joe Biden, he's the oldest US president in office as of now. I mean, the other US president was 78. Closest was Ronald Reagan, whose second term came to an end in his 78th year, but was 77. Second Irish Catholic, or Irish background, and second Roman Catholic to be president.
He makes a lot of his Irish ancestry. I know that's quite an American thing.
It is. And as someone who of Northern Ireland extraction yourself, I'm sure you totally get that.
Yeah. So the thing is, there's actually obviously two tribes in Ireland, like the Ulster Protestant and the Irish Catholic. And when the big waves of Irish to America was largely as a result of the potato famine.
Yeah.
So most Americans, when they say that they are Irish Irish Catholic.
Yeah.
And so and actually they're two different cultures, and you know, obviously there's the war and stuff, the troubles and stuff, but so I sometimes smile at the whole Irish American thing, and certainly if people are going to Northern Ireland and you know they've got the Irish flag and shamrocks everywhere, I'm thinking that's not the right kind of Irish. Scots Irish is the other kind of Irish.
Right. With that said, we should have people coming in shortly. It is 7:30 precisely. So guests here are usually punctual with a yes, Joshua Bergen's entering with about 2 to 3 minute window. But here we are.
Hello, Joshua.
Hi, Josh. Emma Burnell. So it's just Warren Morgan now.
Well, hello, Joshua.
Hi guys, how are you?
Hi.
We're all right. We're all right. Hello, Emma.
Hello. Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
We're okay.
Good, thank you.
Actually, I'm not. I'm knackered. I walked to Stoke Newington and back today, and I'm exhausted.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same walking spree as you, except I think you're walking farther. But
Yeah. Are you doing this 1,000-mile thing?
I'm doing a 10,000 steps a day thing.
You
know what? During lockdown, it's really hard. When I'm commuting into London,
make you sick. Just bear with me 1 second.
Yeah, we are live streaming as of now, so just be warned.
How would I do this?
I can't see it.
Yeah.
Good God. So I've been doing 10,000 a day, and actually today it's really weird. When I used to commute into London, I used to do 7,000 a day just in my normal life.
Yeah. Walking even back for me would basically do it. Very well done.
So I've got 7 full days of green. I'm very impressed at.
No, well, I'm doing this virtual mission to walk 1,000 miles, and they've set out a path from Land's End to John O'Groats.
Okay.
I'm not out of Cornwall yet. But it is only the 20th of January.
So how far did you actually walk then?
Today I walked 9 miles.
Okay, that's a good clip. Yeah, you're feeling it.
So yeah,
Done
I had
that.
to come back and rub. What's that stuff? There's a certain kind of oil that really helps your muscles. So I had to put some of that on when I got home because I'm very old.
Years ago, I used to take part in an annual Good Friday walk around North Hertfordshire, and I can still recall vividly being in the bath at the end and seeing these blisters on my feet. That
Well, unfortunately, my bath, the tap is broken, so you can only pour boiling, scalding hot water. So if I have a bath, I have to plan it 3 hours in advance, pour the bath, and then wait for it to cool down enough to get in it.
Yeah, he's going, and we've got Warren coming in, and I think that's it. We're core it. Hi, Warren. Right. So we are live streaming as of 2 minutes ago, and or several minutes ago. And we're here to, for those of you who've just tuned in to watch, or will be watching later, the Joe Biden inauguration. And have you all watched it? Or yeah.
Yep.
What did you? Yeah, I better. I'm very glad. I've got a co-presenter here because we tend to cover up each other's mistakes. So I went straight in. I didn't introduce people, and I do apologise. So we've got Joshua Bergin here, who's voted Republican in the past, and he's you're in Germany, aren't you?
I'm based in Germany, correct? Aachen.
Been an activist for the Republican Party in Florida.
Yes.
Of some note.
We've got Warren Morgan. He lives in Brighton, former mayor.
Leader of the council.
Leader of the council, yeah. I do apologise. Again,
Those who are local government geeks know the difference. Very few other people do.
Fair enough.
And last but by we'll come to you, mate. We've got Emma Burnell, who
we've just lost Warren. What's happened?
He got so cross that you called him the mayor.
I know. Let's keep going. We've got Emma Burnell, who's a Labour activist.
No, not anymore. That's not how I describe myself. I'm a journalist.
You're a journalist who has been involved in the Labour Party.
Yeah. And I write a lot about the Labour Party, but because I do, I no longer behave as an activist because I don't think you should do both. Exactly,
yeah. And finally, but last but no means least, my wife Rachel, who was involved in the Labour Party former parliamentary candidate, but her parents spent some years living in the US, where her mother was an education advisor to Jesse Ventura when he was governor of Minnesota.
So my parents lived in Minnesota twice. One when I was a baby, they were both teachers by trade, and they did a teaching exchange for 12 months to high school in suburban Twin Cities. So Coon Rapids Senior High School, which is northwest of Minneapolis. And then when I was in my early 20s, they actually spent 5 years. My mum, as I said, was an education advisor for Jesse Ventura. And so they lived in the North Metro area in a place called Lino Lakes. And actually, on that occasion, I actually stayed living in the UK because I went to law school. And though I did kind of go over there on a number of occasions. So that's why I'm interested in American politics.
Yeah. So I take it you all watched the Biden inauguration live.
Mm-hmm.
What did you all take from it?
Some lovely coats.
Oh, you know what? Like they were, but like when a woman is, the best thing you can say about a woman is a coat. Like, doesn't it kind of tug at your feminist heartstrings?
I don't, because what you saw up there was huge flashes of colour that you wouldn't have seen otherwise, from the people in charge, not the people who were just there because they were misses. So I think that when you had, for example, Amy Klobuchar overseeing things in a fabulous coat, previously that just would have been a really boring black overcoat. So actually, those flashes of colour actually spoke in some ways to the moment that was historic, particularly in terms of Kamala Harris.
Did anyone pick up on any significance of anybody's colour? Because I know I noted that what was it? Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton were in exactly the same shade of purple.
There was something said about the colour on CNN that it was a colour associated with Shirley Chisholm,
right?
Who was the first woman to try to be nominated. So I think Shirley Chisholm might have worn that colour when she had her original nomination speech. So I think that's what CNN said. I know that Kamala Harris's outfit was also designed by 2 African-American designers as well, which was obviously a deliberate choice.
Okay. Warren, what did you make of the inauguration?
I'm still getting over Wolf Blitzer confessing to be a big Lady Gaga fan. But,
Now you talk about dresses. My jaw almost dropped when she came onto the stage, and her dress seemed to be wide as could be. I was
for Lady Gaga, that was fairly low key.
As is her general rendition of the national anthem, but we'll leave that aside for the moment.
Yeah.
Well, I got in trouble for being rude about the national anthem.
What, you did?
How so?
Because the words are awful. But I was fair because I said they're awful. They're almost as awful as the British national anthem, which is just the worst song in the history of the world. And everyone was like, no, they're brilliant. I'm like, they're unsingable. The scansion is just impossible.
So, Joshua, would you like to defend your national anthem here?
We all have our personal points of pride. I don't find it hard to sing. But then again, I've sung in my church choir since I was a child.
I have sung on stage at the South Bank Centre. I still would find the scansion of that bloody hard. I mean, it's not, to be fair, it's a better song than God Save the Queen, which is a dirge. But, give me Jerusalem, or, all of the other American patriotic songs I prefer to that one.
I will say, agree with you, I do prefer Jerusalem, although Benjamin Britten's version of God Save the Queen does sort of rescue it slightly from the dirge.
To be fair, you're never going to rescue the fact that it's called God Save the Queen for me.
What, the A, the God, and B, the Queen?
But yeah, I believe in the existence of one, but don't think they should have that job. I'm not entirely sure about the other one at all.
So I will make a public confession on the point of the national anthem. About every 6 months or so, I do a search for whatever the latest rendition of the national anthem is that's shown up on YouTube.
Right.
And I do a parallel search at exactly the same time for the latest rendition that showed up on YouTube of the Russian national anthem.
Why Russia?
There's sort of a complex backstory there that we probably don't have time for, but nevertheless, I'm constantly sort of comparing these two to see what's showing up out of the sort of the cultural agora of both countries, and there's what similarities exist and how there are vast differences as well.
I have to confess, I do the French and Russian national anthems. I do like. But,
France, South Africa for me.
Yeah. So
I think the point is that in the U.S. national anthem, it's usually sort of national recording artist, blah 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 blah, gets to sing, whereas the Russians right now very much make it a communal event, and so they have 40 people singing and pass the baton. It becomes a sort of push towards unity that's contrived, but it's still interesting to observe from a political analysis standpoint.
Yeah. So, what did you think of the Joe Biden speech? That's to all of you, by the way.
I'll keep going.
Yeah.
I liked it. I thought he was disciplined. I thought he was focused. I thought he struck the right tone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that lots of America today breathed a sigh of relief.
Yes.
I know that I did. I'm a lifelong Republican. I've consistently voted Republican. But even I'm looking at that and saying, and just sort of exhaling. Trump was nominally polling in that 40 to 45% range around election day, and clearly he's polling now around 30% or even less. So that tells you that at least 15% of those who voted for him have shed away. And so there's this collective sigh of relief. I probably should stop there, but I also couldn't help but look at that stage and realize that group embodies the class of people who have delivered up America in a way to where Donald Trump could have won to start with, which is a $10 trillion war, an economic collapse in 2008, which then we bailed out Wall Street and nobody went to prison as a vast exception to what we saw in the savings and loan scandal in the 80s. We've seen sort of continued follow on where the elites protect the elites at the expense of everybody else. But I digress. Joe Biden did the right thing today. It was a good speech. And I think most of America is feeling calmer today.
I'd like to unpick this because I do want to understand it. And, kind of, you understand the kind of what fueled the fire of Trumpism. Because you're right, there is an elite and they're a bit of a cartel. But I can't, in my mind, I can't see Trump as any less elite. I mean, maybe I'm seeing him as somebody who's fabulously wealthy, a billionaire with massive, I see him as the embodiment of the elite. I
can't disagree with you. You're actually right. He just wasn't in the pile. He wasn't in the DC pile at the time in 2016 and could claim to be something different. I mean, the thing that struck me as the weirdest of Trump's exit, I guess yesterday, he signed an executive order reversing a previous executive order that banned former government officials from, or lobbyists from coming into the government to advise the government. It's like you're going to drain the swamp, but then on your way out, you reverse the very thing that was one of your signature moves at the start. This is schizophrenic.
I actually find, sorry to interrupt there, someone actually mentioned a tweet of that actually made me smile, which was it shows the sheer narcissism involved in reversing that executive order. Because did they honestly think a whole load of Trump supporters going into Washington, people really think that it would give them kudos to go, I used to work in the Trump administration? Because I can imagine Democrat and Republican, a whole load of doors slamming very firmly shut.
I don't know. I mean, I'm interested to understand, the breaking away of that Trump coalition. Was there, and maybe I get this as a kind of former Corbyn skeptic, but was there always? Did Trump always rely on a large cohort of people who had traditionally voted Republican and voted Republican like Trump
No, he activated a new voter base that then came to swallow the Republicans almost completely whole.
Right.
The traditional Republican voting base had been floating away from the Republicans for a while for various reasons, largely demographic.
Right.
As the suburbs, so in the 60s, there was the white flight to the suburbs.
Yes.
But over the last sort of 50, 60 years, those suburbs have become more and more mixed, more integrated. As that happens, people were less just racially scared. Yeah. And those racial, that kind of racial animus moved further out to the exurbs and to the rural areas.
Right.
But they also just traditionally didn't vote very much, partly because they make it incredibly hard to vote in America. And the more rural you are, the harder it is in some ways. We always see, because it's much easier to film, the big lines at urban voting places, most often in black districts. But actually, you're quite often very cut off from the polls if you live way out in the sticks. And that's something, so these people, they weren't very political with a big P, but they were increasingly feeling that the elite, as you were saying, weren't talking to or about them and didn't have their interests at heart. I mean, I'll be honest, I think Joe Biden is a bit too much of a reversion to the norm for me. He wasn't my candidate. I wanted to vote. If I were American, I'd have voted for Elizabeth Warren, partly because of the Wall Street thing. I think she is the candidate who gets that the most. But I'd rather have Joe Biden than the rapist in chief Donald Trump any day of the week, month, or year. But what Donald Trump did was activate a new voter base. Whether they're new Republicans is a different question. I wrote an article today, published today in Byline Times, about Ted Cruz and what I think Ted Cruz is getting wrong in his fealty to Donald Trump, thinking that that audience will then transfer their loyalty to him. And I don't think it's going to work that way.
I read that. He's basically, the problem is he's always been going for the same crowd.
Yeah, he's going for the same crowd, but he's not the guy that takes that crowd, not least because he's already been made to be what they would say, I hate it because it's a really sexist term, but they've made him out to be a cuck, as they would the more he kisses Donald Trump's ass, the more he proves that he's not the alpha dog. And I just think that they're not going to transfer their loyalty to him.
I agree with you. I completely do. It's certainly possible that someone coming out of the Trump administration inherits some of his coalition, primarily by not provoking them. But the degree to which Ted Cruz, picked up the baton and carried the water, especially in the Senate, failing to anticipate the almost obvious bad outcome from what was brewing outside, left him really burned. And I fully expect for him to have a pretty significant challenge in the Senate the next time he's up in Texas, probably both on the right and the left.
Well, that might then split the vote against him and he'll come through the middle, but yeah.
Well, and but if it's on the right and the left, that's the sort of thing that takes out an incumbent. So if you've got a strong primary opponent who batters you up good, and you've got a decent centrist Democrat in the state of Texas who runs a stellar campaign, a guy like Ted Cruz could go down, even though he is the incumbent, and that's fairly rare.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Yes, sorry, I was thinking about in the primary coming from.
No, not at all. I was thinking about the primary and the general.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that's quite a plausible scenario.
That does lead to thinking, what do you think do you think given their involvement in the events leading up to the storming of the Capitol, do you think there will be any sanctions put against Ted Cruz,
Josh
Hawley,
and then the ones giving tours of the Capitol?
The ones giving tours, maybe. I don't think they'll go for Cruz or Hawley.
No.
I tend to agree.
Yeah.
Why not?
Because
Warren,
there's enough plausible deniability. There's enough. They're going to impeach Trump after he's left office. I think Biden's going to say, you know what? Enough is enough. Move on. Get over it. Implement my agenda.
I don't know.
I'm doing that.
Warren, you were saying something.
I was just going to agree. I think it will be the people like Lauren Boebert who will go. I think it'll be much easier in the House to take action than it will be in the Senate, partly because of the critical balance and the much higher profile of those people. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to Josh Hawley. Is he going to be a pariah? Is he going to challenge to sort of take up the Trumpian mantle? I think a lot depends on whether or how strongly Mitch McConnell goes for Trump and takes people with him in the trial, and whether Trump is barred from office. I think it's really 50-50 whether they get those 17 Republican votes in the Senate. It's a stretch, but depending on what Mitch does, who knows?
It is a stretch, yeah. But I mean, the way Mitch has been talking recently, you have to think, because that guy can count. The main thing Mitch McConnell can do is count to 60. And you have to think that he knows something we don't.
Josh, do you have any sense of, what's going to, is there a critical mass of Republicans in the Senate that would vote to impeach Donald Trump?
I'm going to sort of follow Emma's lead here in that McConnell plays his cards close to his chest. McConnell is incredibly disciplined. There's a reason why he's the top dog and has been now for a long time. Even before he technically was the top dog, he had a senior position and has wielded power effectively for a long time. If he's saying, if he's voicing, given that he's voicing the things he's voicing, that it's important to drive through, that it's for the good of the country, that it's one of the most important things that could possibly be done, I think he will he will use the levers he has and will whip votes. And let's be crass at the same time. There's no question that it represents a pretty big horse trade for him. So if he's able to deliver that up, what are the Democrats going to do in exchange? Because nothing comes for free in politics. Certainly not Washington politics.
And I'd imagine with like Joe Biden being a creature of the Senate, and a creature, and somebody who has worked bipartisan for decades, that he will be cutting deals with Mitch McConnell.
Well, and I suspect it may even be more nuanced than that. I suspect Joe's going to be picking up the phone and calling members in for private meeting. One of the most valuable thing a president has to give is time. And so if he's calling somebody in and saying, Senator so-and-so, I really need your vote here. This is important. This is about the future of the country. You may not like me as president. You may not support my party, but do you really want even the specter of that chaos coming back to the White House? And even as importantly, to continue wrecking your party? And then, of course, the other person's going to say something like, well, Mr. President, you're making a good point. I'm weighing it carefully. One of my priorities this year is XYZ.
What can you do?
What are your thoughts on this? Oh, I don't think they might not be quite so express as, will you support me if I support you? But more along those, what are your thoughts on this? Do we have any common ground? And, they'll do that sort of dance where there's no express quid pro quos in the vast majority of cases. And then, that'll contribute to McConnell's sort of whipping efforts on the floor as well. That would be my guess.
Okay. Warren, is that something that you can identify with? Have you had to do any horse trading in Brighton and Hove Council?
Well, we did, yeah. Under Brighton's antiquated system, no one's had a majority for 20 years, so it was always horse trading between us and the Conservatives and the Greens.
Joshua, just so you're aware, Brighton is kind of a bastion, is one of the bastions of the Green Party, which is broadly to the left of the Labour Party, are they? And so yeah, which is obviously has created some interesting issues over the years.
For what it's worth, I've been to Brighton.
What?
I've been to Brighton. Yes.
So have I.
Yeah.
Well, of course we have, Rachel. They have conferences there.
And the beautiful Chinese pavilion, but hey.
So the Labour Party holds its annual conference like every other year in Brighton. Yeah. And so therefore, if you're a member of the Labour Party, the chances are you've been to Brighton.
I have been to Brighton, not just for party conferences. A friend of mine at university lived in Brighton. So
one of my best friends who I met at university was originally from Hove. So when she lived in London now since 2000, I think. But yeah, when she still lived there, we went back.
So we've touched on Trump. He's now out of office. He's, as far as a president can leave office in disgrace, under the circumstances, he is left in disgrace. What do you think Donald Trump's future is? Because thankfully, he didn't even attempt to pardon himself.
Do you think that was even realistically on the cards, or do you think that would have
probably advised that if he did pardon himself, it would actually hurt matters, particularly with the impeachment, because it's an admission of guilt.
Right. So so Joshua, would that have led to almost certain impeachment if he'd done that?
I can't say. I mean, you could certainly see where a pardon is an admission of guilt. And so if you're pardoning yourself in advance of an impeachment, I mean, there's nothing about an impeachment that stops about a pardon that stops the impeachment process. That stops the legal process, perhaps in this case. That's never been tested to my knowledge. But in the case of an impeachment, it's purely political. And frankly speaking, there are those who want to see Donald Trump prosecuted once he leaves office, for all an odd and sundry of things. I think the political remedy is the best remedy, because if you go down that road of formal legal prosecutions of presidents, that sets a there's just a bad precedent there.
Is that what you talked about
banana republics do this with their ex-presidents, and it becomes much more of an existential threat to an outgoing president to hold on as hard as they possibly can. There is a political order here, and I'm much more supportive of an impeachment. I don't really want to see him come back, and that would guarantee it.
I
So
think
what you're saying is that, like, if like he was basically, the police turned up at his door and he was arrested for random crimes, and like, because of you think that would be a greater threat to the future of democracy in the USA than an impeachment, because like if he was a criminal prosecution would basically set a precedent that could take the USA down a dangerous road.
I think precedents are powerful, and when you set precedents that feel benign to start with, they do have the potential down the road to create really bad outcomes.
The precedent,
for bad precedents, and I don't think you answer a bad precedent with another bad precedent.
Well,
I think Josh is right about some things. I don't think Trump should be prosecuted for anything he did in office.
Right.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff that they're talking about, particularly the stuff that would never have been covered by a pardon anyway, because it's actually not federal.
Level.
So the stuff from the Southern District of New York. I think you cannot have a get out of jail free card by becoming president. So I think that if you have committed crimes, or if he goes on to commit crimes, which given his very precarious financial situation at the moment is perfectly possible, then he doesn't get to be treated differently than anybody else. But I do agree that he should not be prosecuted for anything that he did in office.
Warren, you're saying...
yeah, and apologies for my bad internet connection.
Yeah,
I think if he's not prosecuted, if he's not held to account under the rule of law, then that sets a precedent for the next Trump to come along and know that they can breach the law with impunity. I think a difficult balance in that, it does appear that the Democrats are doing.
I think
we
we've
keep
lost
losing
your
Warren. Let me message him.
One thing we all know about Brighton, having been there, is it's got bloody awful internet.
So can I pull the question back a bit? How many of you watched the Trump's parting speech?
I didn't
Yeah.
actually. I was walking to Stoke Newington.
Did you watch it, Paul?
I saw it, to be honest, and I think you all know my feelings about Trump. They're the same as pretty much everyone else's. It was the usual, oh, what a great presidency I had. We did these great things, blah, blah, blah. It was very jarring when he said about working in something along the lines of working in harmony with Congress. And I was
that was chuckle-worthy, wasn't it?
Well, it was chuckle-worthy in a contemptuous, oh, why don't you just... several expletives did cross my brain when I was watching it. But at the end of the day, it's just like, it felt like overall, we just got to endure this last little thing from Trump, and then as president, and then he's out.
We've got you again, Warren. Were you in the middle of a sentence there?
I probably was. Yeah, just saying that. I think you've got to put the rule of law first, and yeah, other precedents are tricky, and the political aspect is tricky. There's the risk of appearing, as you say, Josh, like Trump said about Hillary Clinton, lock her up. But if you don't impose the rule of law, then you run that risk further down the line of someone saying, well, I can get away with this.
I do agree, but I mean, but I think that if he is impeached, I would feel more relaxed about whether, because I think that's sufficiently serious that he's kind of had the consequences. But then, I mean, if the consequences of impeachment, you don't go to prison for impeachment. You just like can't run again, and you're barred from office, and you don't get security. Is that right?
Barred from office, lose security, probably lose your retirement, whatever retirement's associated with.
Melania loses her $1 million travel allowance every year.
Right. But so to move on to your question, Joshua, I didn't watch it because I was at work, and so I was only I only had it off in the background. I found the image of him kind of leaving in the way that he did quite well. I don't know, like by that point I was like, he's only got a few hours and he's going to be out anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like, but I did find the kind of the gracelessness of the exit quite jarring. But I suppose it was in character.
In this, he twice put over his family members.
What?
You know, you've got a whole bunch of staff that are standing there with you, who are like Paul implied earlier, have put a lot of credibility on the line. Will likely not be able to get jobs in DC for a long time, if ever. And I just found it really tactless that he twice mentioned his family, his hardworking family, how much the family had sacrificed for the country, whereas, you know, Rudy Giuliani's reputation's in tatters. A number of other attorneys that have represented him will never have decent opportunities again. A whole bunch of people there whose names we'll never know are just out, and all he can do is put over his kids. I had to shake my head at that. And the final touch of it all was his music, and as Air Force One takes off. Lord knows how they did this timing. This was on CNN.
Was that he did it my way?
When he did it my way, but it was so perfectly timed that literally the final words of the song are as the back wheels of Air Force One are lifting off the ground. It was like something from a movie. And how do you script that? Really?
I mean, I'll give him that. He's a showman.
I did
like it was just I found myself in that moment going, God, if I didn't know better, this is kabuki theater. It's all fake. And I'm not being QAnon here. I don't believe it's all fake, but the timing was so tight. It was like, oh my gosh.
I did see the someone had put forward this fake montage of the US Army going past the White House yesterday. It turned out to be fake, but part of me wishes it was true. And they were playing the brass band were playing "Hit the Road, Jack." And I just so when that was shared, I thought that tune was sort of been playing in my head today as the get lost. But I mean, we're talking about because Donald Trump is not someone who shows grace and compassion. You know, he's like all sorts of nasty individuals. You would expect him to, if he sees his enemies suffering, to gloat and throw pain at them. And to be honest, though, for all of that, for all the criticisms, I will agree with two things Trump has done in the last 2 weeks: not attending the inauguration, and not giving Melania Trump not giving Joe and Dr. Jill Biden a tour of the White House. And I'll tell you why. What Trump was involved with on the 6th of January was absolutely... I'm still in shock and I'm still fuming about what he did.
What you mean, if he'd been there, he would actually have been a danger to the inauguration?
Well, it's not even that. I think what he did was so disgusting. It's the other way around. It's like, you are unfit to be there. And we don't... It's like, I ended up being so disgusted with Trump. It was like, I don't want you. I see
where you're coming from. I think it was why. I mean, it was graceless that he wasn't there. On the other hand, it was probably wise given what had happened 2 weeks earlier, and that him not being there. I mean, there was some talk. I mean, when he was banned from Twitter, they were saying that him saying that he wasn't going to be there was kind of telling his supporters that it would be safe to target the inauguration. But I mean, I was kind of looking, and don't know whether they interpreted it that way and whether that was correct. But I did think, given the circumstances, it was probably sensible he wasn't there because he wasn't a distraction.
Yeah.
It really sort of set himself apart from all the other presidents that were there. And I thought it was the right thing to do, but it reflected so badly on him. But then he said in his farewell remarks that his was not a regular presidency. And perhaps that's right, that he was set apart, that he's not He's not part of the ceremony that happened with the other former presidents at Arlington National Cemetery, and he won't be part of that group going forward at funerals and future inaugurations. So
interesting. I was thinking, Paul, if, say, for example, the Republicans win, or whoever, like, because it's not going to be Joe Biden anyway, because he said he's not going to run again. But is he not going to attend any future inaugurations ever? What do you think, Joshua?
That remains to be seen.
I suppose it depends on what happens with the impeachment.
Some future loyalist comes along and it is a Trump fan, perhaps, but since it's not all about him, I have some doubts. I really have no idea. There's only speculation there.
I don't think Nixon did he?
Nixon, I'd have to look it up.
That's
One
an
thing
interesting question,
I will say something though about Nixon, and because you've inadvertently raised a good point about I've noticed a lot of people have said over the last 2 years how they've suddenly developed some kind of respect for Nixon that they didn't have.
Because at least he had the dignity to resign.
He had the dignity to resign. And when he was interviewed by David Frost, he came as close to an apology as he could in a way that you could never imagine Donald Trump doing. And he also, I remember as a teenager when I first heard of him, Nixon was still alive, being disgusted whenever he was at any public event, because I thought he should remain after Watergate, he should be in seclusion for life. But he did undergo some kind of internal, external rehabilitation. And Clinton says in his memoirs, his first year of president was the last year of Nixon's life, and he frequently consulted with Nixon. And Clinton was a Democrat, and his wife was involved and Hillary was involved in the prosecution of Nixon during Watergate, the investigation against Nixon and Watergate. So there was no reason for them to do that. But I think Nixon, there's something a bit more respectful about Nixon, and I'm not diminishing what Nixon did.
I'm sorry, but not Trump is not a bar that's high enough to be a respected ex-president.
That is fair point. That is a fair point.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is I can't see Trump doing the things Nixon did.
But I do think that, like, he did so many outrageous things from my perspective during his presidency. But I do think that what happened 2 weeks ago seemed to cross a Rubicon.
For a lot of people.
Did sponsoring a break-in at Watergate. It's just that the Rubicon was different then.
A little light burglary, a little insurrection,
He didn't just bend the norms. He didn't just, it wasn't. He completely smashed the norms to pieces in a way that.
But my point is that in the late 1960s, 1970s, the norms were also smashed to pieces, and they sponsored criminal activity. And I don't think we should, just because now these other norms that are, I'm not saying what Trump, Trump is the worst president we've ever had. I'm not saying that Nixon's not slightly better than Trump. I'm saying that slightly better than Trump is not good enough to rehabilitate him.
I do that wasn't quite what I was aiming for.
What you were really saying was that, Trump is so bad he makes Nixon look almost not so bad.
And at least Nixon had the courtesy to realise he had done something wrong. Whether he gave a sort of qualified apology of sorts when he was interviewed by David Frost 3 years later. Not an apology. I would have expected something a bit more.
I see what you mean. But I do think something struck at the heart of American democracy that you could feel palpably, even on the Republican side, really kind of hit a nerve. Would you agree, Joshua?
It was just chaos. Yes, there was tendencies of, the guy had autocratic tendencies that of course he could never execute on. I personally sort of rankled a bit every time the press called him a fascist, because fascists have a singular party. They control the government. They arrest their opponents. This is something that on his wildest day, Trump couldn't have pulled that off, but he did without question have autocratic tendencies. The thing that bothered me the most was the chaos. If you look back, Nixon, for all of Nixon's faults, and we've identified them, we know them. He did big things. Nixon went to China. Go jump forward. You know, if you want to look at Kennedy, Kennedy solved the Cuban Missile Crisis. Reagan led a coalition, or worked closely with a coalition, to bring about the end of the Soviet Union. Bush 41 comes along and basically carried forward with that Reagan started, and goes to the Gulf, builds up, declares victory, comes home, big project. Clinton more or less presided peaceably. You know, he had Bosnia and Kosovo and all of that, an accomplishment. You move forward to Bush 41, big war, or Bush 43, big war. I disagree with it. It was $10 trillion expended. A lot of it went to his crony buddies, and I think it was a bad. You know, overall the outcomes were bad, but at least he enriched his buddies. He did a big thing. Obama has Obamacare and a couple other accomplishments. Trump, I don't know what he had. Every speech I watched, it was like he would say something for 90 seconds and then somebody would shout squirrel and he would go in another direction completely. It never made any sense to me. And the thing that drove this home to me recently was I was doing some research, and I was forced to go back and watch Reagan's Evil Empire speech. Now, we all remember the term evil empire. It was two words at the very end of the speech. This is what people don't understand. It was the last 30 seconds of the speech that evil empire was voiced. But Reagan went into the National Association of Evangelicals. He spends 20 to 22 minutes being one of them, being approachable, amenable, using humor, identification with the audience, speaking to their issues, addressing their issues, talking about how his administration has worked on them, will continue to work on them. Whether you agree with them agree with it or not is immaterial. He was on point. He was on message. He delivered. And in the final 7 minutes, he talked about what he wanted to talk about, which was the Soviet Union, nuclear missiles, arms reductions, all of these sorts of things. And the most powerful part was he was talking to an audience that were community leaders concentrated in one spot in Orlando, Florida. And when they were done, they were going back to their communities. And he seeded in their minds language that was repeatable, that was usable in their services or in private conversations with their deacon boards, etc. And his final words, which were for the external audience, for the media, was the evil empire. And the media goes wild. Trump, on his best day, never once delivered a speech anywhere like that. And that was one speech for Reagan. And this is my biggest objection with Trump. Some of his policy positions that everybody's heads exploded over, I'm, a little sanguine. I'm less willing to string him up. But the fact that he was President Chaos, just for me, is, I hope he never, ever comes back. I hope he never has control over the Republican Party again. I hope that he can go off in the sunset and we never see him again. Sorry for that soapbox. I finally got triggered here tonight.
I posit to you, Josh, that actually the scarier thought is someone with all of Trump's urges and autocracy, and for me, policy positions. You, as I say, you're a bit more sanguine. We're obviously on slightly different sides of the spectrum, but without the chaos.
I understand. I know full well that's true. And I will follow that up and say, if our U.S. elites cannot come to terms with the fact that they are the cause, there is a direct relationship between the policy making that they do and Middle America's perception of their enfranchisement in the society. If they can't solve that, we will get another one, and it'll be far worse. And I completely agree with you on that point. For what it's worth, a little plug, I'm actively writing a book to lay out why we got Trump, what elected Trump, and how it can happen again. And it literally speaks to the very things I've already talked about. It speaks to a $10 trillion war. It speaks to a Wall Street collapse and then bailout on the backs of middle Americans. It's detailed enough. I mean, every one of these topics could get their own book, but it's detailed enough to where someone who doesn't know these things could read it and follow it. But the point is to synthesize. If you look at the mosaic of, I want to say a bad word here, but I'm not going to, the mosaic of crap that the elites have delivered to America over the last 20 plus years. And I know some of it predates the last 20 years, but some of these things that just sequentially sort of add up, people start to say, we're not in the 80s anymore. You can research on the internet. It's all at your fingertips. You don't have to go to the library. You can see it in real time. So people are understanding. People in middle America who would never have paid attention can bring it all more or less together and say, oh, they're really screwing us. And no one's listening to us.
Yeah.
Oh, I need somebody who's going to represent me. And Trump, in my view, was a primal scream.
So, like, here's the thing. I'm seeing it through a left-right prism here, because there are some issues that you're talking about that I can see have given rise to an authoritarian right-wing president of Donald Trump. But that actually the same issues can be interpreted and are argued on the left. So, for example, like the Iraq war is a massive issue for the left, right? And absolutely massive issue for the left, and particularly within the Labour Party, because it was obviously Tony Blair who was Prime Minister at the time. And, you know, there is an extent to which people who supported Iraq on the left have been kind of tainted by that. And then, of course, the bailing out of the banks, which again, there is a left-wing analysis of that, which is, you know, it wasn't the nurses and the teachers and it wasn't people on benefits who crashed the economy. So why are we having cuts to public services and to welfare provision? And that's a left-wing analysis. And I'm just interested to how the same issues can drive people to both the right and to the left.
There is that, but I think it does trigger a number of things that I do want to touch on, because I'm aware of time moving on. Joe Biden, there's the past, but there's also the future, and we've got 4 years of a Biden administration. What are you hoping to see from President Biden, and how do you think he will manage? How do you think he'll fare in these 4 years?
I've talked a lot, so I'm going to let somebody else go.
Warren?
As someone who's not an American citizen, the key thing I want him to do is act on climate change, because that's an international crisis that is facing all of us. Obviously, the first thing he's going to do is try and get a grip on COVID.
Yes.
But I really want to see in the next 4 years huge movement on climate change. And I think that you can tie that up with the agenda that Josh is talking about. Because there are many, many ways to make that something that brings jobs back to the kind of traditional workforces that have seen so much of their work outsourced and moved overseas. So I'd like to see a blue collar green strategy that America starts to lead on, because I think without America's leadership on it, it won't happen, because America is the biggest contributor.
Okay, Warren?
I think a lot depends on what happens in Congress. I think a lot depends on what happens with the vice president. I think we've seen over the transition a much more of a partnership transition, and this is going to be much more of a partnership presidency. I think obviously with the intent of setting Kamala Harris up to take over from Joe Biden in 4 years' time, but in between that you've got a set of midterms where obviously there are the narrowest possible majority in the Senate, a very narrow majority in the House. What happens with the Republican Party? Do they unite and try and get the Democrats out? Do they fight each other to a standstill in primaries and lose? Do they, with the control that they have in a lot of the state legislatures, do they gerrymander the districts so that they deliver themselves a majority? That could severely limit what Biden and Harris are able to do. So there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, a lot of that is tied up with what happens with Trump. So yeah, I think there's a lot that we need to see over the next 6 months, 8 months, with Trump, with the Republican Party, and how that sets up the midterms.
Okay.
I have something. and this is me being half Irish for a moment, which is I always have a little smile when Joe Biden refers to himself as Irish when actually he's just Irish American, but never mind. But I hope that his influence over Brexit and the potential for I don't think Ireland will blow up now, because it seems that the trade barrier border is between the island of Ireland and the mainland. But I think that there are potential problems in Ireland as a result of Brexit, and I'm hoping that an Irish American presidency might help that.
Josh,
I'm going to pick up where Emma was on climate change. In the past, there have been numerous conversations with Middle America where climate change conversations come up, and it almost always comes down to, or at least it's perceived to come down to, Americans are going to have to sacrifice in order to make this different, in order to make this happen. As if the onus is on, like you said earlier, Rachel, the teachers and the local community residents. It's like, you have to stop driving as much. You have to get, energy efficient cars. And I'm not saying that energy efficient cars are bad or any such thing. However, if you look at US policy around investor owned utilities, in many of the states where investor owned utilities are the norm, hooking up solar on your home is difficult. Oh, it's not impossible, but the barriers that are set up are so great that you can't proactively engage in this way, because the investor-owned utilities don't want to see the loss of revenues. And so a national policy, a third way sort of national policy that's not sort of mandating massive personal change, but forcing some of the institutional actors to make changes, opening doors for other things to happen. So new housing starts, in my view, in the United States should include solar, period. No exceptions. You can mandate that, but you're not mandating a higher cost, because solar at this point is offsetting the cost of electricity. That's not a bad mandate. You're not forcing, you're not forcing the average workaday guy who's already disadvantaged to have to cough up more cash or take on more debt. You're adding something that over time will reduce their cost of energy anyway. If Biden and company can take this sort of third way approach to some of the more thorny issues out there and play less about DC inside politics and more about sort of where middle America is, I think that he can have almost not only a successful presidency, but can leave an incredible legacy because of such strong contrast to Trump. Now, I have doubts about that because, as I think I touched on in a previous call, Washington is controlled by special interests, because our committee structure in Washington since 1970 has been open to the special interests who go in there and create ranked scorecards on every single vote. They drive the performance and behavior of members of Congress and Senate through the positive incentives on the front side of donation, or the after vote donations. Of course, it's never directly. It's not the same day or the day after, but it's 3 months ahead or 3 months after. And then there's always the specter of, if you cross us too badly, we'll drop $1 million in it through a committee against you in a primary, or 5 million in a general. And that scares the crap out of politicians, because what does every politician want? To be reelected, full stop.
Yeah,
I'm skeptical about that third way approach, but I'm hopeful that it's possible.
I've done a lot of policy work in this area over a number of years, and I was minded that actually the sort of debates that we have with the Greens is quite relevant here, because I suppose the Green Party take a very ideologically pure position on climate change. It's like, regardless of the personal cost to the individual. But in the Labour space, there has been a lot of interesting work, and certainly in terms of renewable energy on homes, that could mean that people potentially theoretically have free electricity. And the green industrial revolution, which the blue collar jobs that can come from a green industrial revolution, I think is very important in terms of infrastructure. Joshua, did you want to, Warren, did you want to add anything from your debates with the Greens on this?
Well, the Greens are anti-growth and anti-car, and whether that's a petrol or diesel-driven car or whether that's an electric vehicle, they are opposed to both equally because they oppose the means of generation and they oppose growth full stop. So that's where they differ very, very starkly with Biden's kind of green jobs, which appeals very much to his kind of blue collar constituency up in Delaware and the states around it. So there's a real difference of message there. One is, we can grow our economy, we can grow our lifestyles, but we have to adapt to new technology and develop new technology. And the other is we've got to stop and we've got to go back to a more basic way of life, because any kind of growth is going to be detrimental to the environment. Now, people can take their choice on those two arguments. I would fall on the Biden side.
Time's pressing on, and we're nearly at an end here. But before I go, I just wanted to touch one thing that few seem to have noticed, that there's been a milestone reached today of some sorts, which is that Jimmy Carter has now it's been 40 years since he left the White House, and whilst he has held the record for longest survival after office for nearly a decade now, I think it's incredible that someone who left office in 1981 is still with us today. And one of the things that reasons, it's not just that, but it's sort of led to it, that Jimmy Carter's been in mind, is how much his record as president is questionable. But his record out of office has been seen as exemplary. He's seen as one of the best ex-presidents there is. And, with Habitat of Humanity and other things that he's done that just show a common decency. And I was just wondering, what would your general advice be to, as a final push? Very brief answers. What would your general advice be to ex-presidents apart from Bush? Once they leave, what would you like to see them do?
Depends on the president, doesn't it? I mean, I want Trump to go away, just shut himself in Mar-a-Lago, play golf, and never speak in public again.
Yes, but I did say apart from Trump. I did say apart from.
You actually said apart from Bush, but we'll correct.
Yeah.
I said apart from Bush too.
No, I meant apart from Trump. Sorry, but I
think it's really difficult because you've got people like Obama, who's probably got another 40 years in him. What's he going to do with them? And it is, and we had the same with Tony Blair still hanging around because he was really young when he was prime minister. So what the hell is he going to do with the rest of his life? I mean, they usually go off and start an institute and do charitable works and stuff, and great, do the things
in a library.
But I think being subtle about it is the key, because actually there's so much. Sorry, I was going to swear and I won't, because I know, well, you two are too nice for me. But there's so much nonsense talked about, if X was still in charge, things would be so different. It's like, X has not been in charge for, depending on which X we're talking about, 4 years, 13 years, 20 gazillion years. And actually, we're in a different world from X's world now. Tony Blair never sent an email until after he left office. Can you imagine that world? So you've got to, and the more that we look back at the X's, the more that we don't see the future. So my advice to any ex-president is be subtle, be in the background, because it's not your epoch anymore.
Joshua and Warren, do you want to add to that, albeit briefly?
I think I'd agree with Emma. Leaders are of their time. Trump wouldn't have existed pre-Twitter age. Speaking as a very minor former leader myself, you have to realize that those times have gone, things have moved on, new people new people are coming in. So it's look to the future. I think former presidents need to find a role or retire quietly.
I think you've made a great point, Paul, about the contribution to society and the world that Carter has made. I think we can look at other presidents and sort of question how, with all that privilege and all, and typically they're not poor, so they have the means that that they're not necessarily doing something that's obvious in terms of impacting the world the way Carter has. And I'll leave it with one thought, and it's one that's stuck with me throughout my life for a long time, because I look at this former president as a model in a couple ways. And I'm speaking of John Quincy Adams. At 17, he was America's I think first ambassador to Russia. He would become later president, and when he left the presidency, he ran again for Congress, and he spent his remaining years railing at the Congress for allowing and the perpetuation of slavery. As much as he no longer had the national spotlight, he was still agitating for a good cause. And the idea that a president has done their bit and they can just completely step aside and no longer have an obligation to work towards a better cause just strikes me as an unfulfilled obligation.
I see that.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you all of you. It's been, I think, for all of us quite a good day, because we a long, to quote Gerald Ford, a long nightmare is over. Well, sort of over, but at least it's over in the White House. And thank you all for your contributions, and I hope you all have a good evening and a good rest of the week. Thank you. And we will be having some more of these discussions on Mars Hill as the days and weeks go by, and I'll keep you all informed. So thank you for watching. Bye.
All right.